Imagine walking into a once grand throne room, its marble floors cracked, its banners faded, and a single crown lying abandoned on the steps. No guards, no courtiers, no monarch, just silence where power once spoke. History is filled with tales of kings who were overthrown and empires that collapsed, but there is something far more haunting than defeat: disappearance. What happens when a dynasty doesn't fall in battle or fade through exile, but simply vanishes? No assassinations recorded, no heirs confirmed, no clear ending, only whispers. Across the centuries, empires have risen and fallen, yet a few royal families left behind nothing but questions. They were once the most powerful people in their world. Rulers who shaped nations, commanded armies, and wrote laws that governed millions. Then, almost without warning, they were gone. Was it war? Betrayal? Or something more mysterious? The House of Burgundy, the Merovingian kings, the emperors of Trebizond, all once stood at the pinnacle of power, only to dissolve into rumor and speculation. These are not just old stories about forgotten thrones. They are windows into how fragile power can be, how easily it slips through generations, and how history itself decides who is remembered and who is erased. Behind the glittering crowns and royal titles were human beings, ambitious, flawed, frightened, and proud. Some fought to hold on to their legacies. Others surrendered to forces beyond their control. Yet, all shared a common fate: to be consumed by time's slow erosion, leaving only echoes behind. Even now, centuries later, their mysteries linger. Did their bloodlines truly end, or did descendants blend quietly into ordinary life? Could the person standing next to you be unknowingly linked to a vanished king or queen? The thought is both thrilling and unsettling. It challenges what we think we know about history and reminds us that truth is often buried beneath layers of myth, conquest, and silence. In this video, we'll travel deep into that silence. We'll uncover how dynasties rise to glory and slip into obscurity without a trace. From the political intrigues that weaken them, to the wars that erase their lands, to the subtle forces of intermarriage and absorption that dissolve their very names, we'll explore how history forgets even those who once seemed immortal. More importantly, we'll ask what their disappearance says about us today, in a world where power still shifts and empires, digital or political, remain as fragile as ever. Because when you strip away the crowns, what remains are stories of humanity itself, of families, ambition, loss, and legacy. The echoes of empire remind us that nothing, no matter how powerful, truly lasts forever. Yet their mysteries continue to call out, inviting us to listen, to wonder, and to remember. Welcome to our channel, Words of Time. In this video, we'll journey into the haunting world of the echoes of empire, the story of royal dynasties that didn't just fall but vanished. Stay with us as we uncover forgotten histories, explore unanswered questions, and bring to light the powerful lessons hidden in their disappearance. Imagine the echo of footsteps in an empty throne room. The air is thick with silence, dust floating through shafts of light breaking in from shattered stained glass. A crown lies on the floor, its jewels dull, its meaning lost. Once it symbolized authority, lineage, and divine right. Now it is nothing more than an artifact of a forgotten rule. Picture a dynasty that had stood for hundreds of years, its power unquestioned, its influence reaching across continents, suddenly gone. Not overthrown by revolution, not conquered by war, not even exiled to foreign lands. Gone, as if history itself decided to erase their name. The concept sounds like fiction, but history is full of such mysteries. Empires rise and fall, but sometimes they do not fall at all. They simply vanish, leaving behind questions that historians, archaeologists, and storytellers still try to answer. In the world of 2025, monarchies still hold a certain fascination. Even though most nations have long turned to democracy or other forms of government, the image of royalty remains powerful. The pomp, the ceremony, the ancient bloodlines, and the tales of betrayal, love, and loss continue to draw public attention. Modern monarchies like those in Britain, Sweden, Japan, or Spain survive as symbols of tradition and continuity. Yet the idea of a vanished dynasty feels like a ghost from the past returning to remind us that even the most powerful are not safe from time. There are no guarantees in history, and even a crown cannot shield a family from oblivion. The story of lost empires and vanished royal lines is not only about politics or war. It is also about identity and memory. Each dynasty that disappears takes with it a part of a culture's heart. Palaces fall into ruin, names fade from records, and portraits hang in forgotten halls where no one recognizes the faces. But the traces remain, in legends, in ruins, and in the small fragments that outlive their makers. Every civilization has its ghosts, and many of those ghosts wear crowns. Centuries ago, the world was ruled by dynasties that believed their power came from divine will. Pharaohs of Egypt were gods on earth, emperors of China were the sons of heaven, and kings of Europe were chosen by divine right. They built cities, led armies, and shaped faiths. Yet for every name that still survives in history books, there are dozens more that vanished without a trace. Sometimes they were wiped out by disease or war. Sometimes they faded quietly as their lands were absorbed by greater powers. And sometimes they vanished so completely that even their graves were lost. One of the earliest and most haunting disappearances was that of the Hittite Empire. It once stood as one of the great powers of the ancient Near East, rivaling Egypt and Babylon. Then, around the 12th century before the Common Era, it vanished. Its cities were burned, its capital Hattusa left in ruins, and its people scattered. For thousands of years, the Hittites were forgotten until archaeologists rediscovered their existence in the 19th century. Before that, even their language was unknown. A whole empire had been erased so cleanly that it took modern science to bring it back to memory. Their disappearance reminds us how fragile even the mightiest powers can be when history. A similar silence fell over the Maya civilization of Central America. The Maya were masters of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. They built towering pyramids, mapped the stars, and developed one of the most advanced writing systems of the ancient world. Yet by the time Europeans reached the Americas, many of their cities had already been abandoned. The people remained, but the great centers of power had fallen into the jungle. Scholars still debate what caused their decline: warfare, drought, rebellion, or disease. Perhaps it was a combination of all these. What remains undeniable is that a civilization that had thrived for centuries dissolved, leaving behind temples and inscriptions that whisper of a greatness now buried beneath vines. As history moved forward, other dynasties met quieter fates. The Romanov family in Russia faced a brutal end in the early 20th century, executed during the Revolution. Yet even their story carried the mystery of disappearance. For years, rumors spread that one of the daughters, Anastasia, had survived. Imposters appeared across Europe, claiming her name, and entire investigations followed. It took decades before DNA evidence confirmed the resting place of the whole family. The fascination with the Romanovs was not just about tragedy, but about the lingering hope that royal blood might still run somewhere in secret, a hidden heir waiting to reclaim a lost throne. The idea of a vanished royal line speaks to something deep in human imagination. Royalty represents continuity. A dynasty ties past to present through lineage and ritual. When that is broken, it feels as though history itself has been interrupted. The story of the last Inca emperor, Atahualpa, captured and executed by Spanish conquerors in the 16th century, symbolizes this rupture. The Inca Empire did not vanish instantly, but its leadership was decapitated, its traditions suppressed, and its language nearly erased. Legends later claimed that one branch of the royal bloodline escaped into the mountains, preserving the true Inca heritage in secret. Whether real or not, the legend persists, because people want to believe that history does not end so easily. In Africa, entire kingdoms have also disappeared from record. The Kingdom of Kush, once a rival to Egypt and home to powerful rulers known as the Black Pharaohs, fell into obscurity after centuries of prominence. Its monuments still stand in modern Sudan, but for a long time, the world forgot its name. Another example is the Kingdom of Benin, famed for its art and culture. When British forces attacked it in the 19th century, they destroyed much of the royal palace and exiled the Oba, the king. The royal family survived, but their power was stripped away. What once was a vibrant empire became a story told through looted bronzes displayed in foreign museums. The same patterns appear in Asia. The Mughal Empire of India, known for its splendor and architecture, declined slowly after centuries of rule. By the time the British colonized India, the Mughal emperor was little more than a symbolic figure. After the failed Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British exiled the last emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, to Burma. He died in a foreign land, buried in an unmarked grave. The empire that had built the Taj Mahal, that had once commanded armies across the subcontinent, ended not with a grand battle, but with quiet erasure. History closed the book and moved on. China, too, saw dynasties rise and vanish. The Qing, the last imperial family, fell in the early 20th century when revolution swept the nation. The emperor, Puyi, was forced to abdicate, becoming a symbol of a vanished era. For a time, he lived as an ordinary citizen, then as a puppet under Japanese control during their occupation of Manchuria. His story captured the tragedy of a man born to rule, yet destined to watch his empire dissolve around him. When he died, he left behind no throne, no kingdom, only memories of a vanished world. Even in Europe, where monarchies are often seen as stable symbols of continuity, history has its disappearances. The House of Bourbon in France fell during the Revolution, and though restored later, it never regained its old authority. The Habsburgs, once rulers of a vast empire that stretched from Spain to Austria, lost everything after the First World War. Their palaces still stand, their portraits still hang in museums, but the families themselves live as private citizens. What once was divine right is now heritage. What once commanded armies now hosts tourists. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire reigned for centuries as one of the most powerful dynasties in history. Its sultans ruled lands spanning 3 continents. Yet in the aftermath of the First World War, it too dissolved. The last sultan, Mehmed VI, fled into exile. The empire was replaced by a republic, and the caliphate was abolished. For many, it was the end of an era that had lasted for more than 600 years. The sultan's line still exists, scattered across different countries, but its power is gone. The echo of that empire still lingers in architecture, language, and law, but the throne itself stands empty. Sometimes, the disappearance is not physical, but symbolic. A royal family may survive, but its meaning fades. Modern monarchs live in a world of cameras, diplomacy, and constitutional limits. Their crowns are ceremonial, their palaces museums. Yet public fascination remains. The idea of a vanished monarchy, one that existed and then was lost, reminds people that history is fragile. A photograph of an empty throne or a crumbling crown speaks to this truth more than any textbook could. It captures the end of something that once seemed eternal. The vanished dynasties also leave behind moral questions. How should we remember them? Were they symbols of oppression or culture bearers of their time? The fall of a monarchy often brings liberation for the people who lived under it, yet it also erases traditions, languages, and art forms that grew around the court. The destruction of palaces and archives often means the loss of entire histories. To study vanished empires is not to glorify them, but to understand how power, culture, and human ambition intertwine, and how easily they can fade. Archaeology and historical research continue to uncover clues about these lost realms. Excavations in the Middle East have revealed tablets, inscriptions, and artifacts that rewrite what we thought we knew about ancient rulers. In South America, researchers are using laser mapping technology to find entire lost cities hidden beneath jungle canopies, cities that once belonged to forgotten royal lineages. In Europe, genetic studies trace the descendants of royal bloodlines once thought extinct. Each discovery is another piece in the vast puzzle of how empires live and die. The emotional pull of vanished royalty also lies in the human stories behind the power. A crown may symbolize a state, but behind it are individuals, rulers, children, servants, courtiers, all swept away by forces beyond their control. When a dynasty disappears, it is not only politics that ends but a family's story. Imagine being born into a world where you are told that your bloodline defines your purpose, and then watching that world collapse. For many royals, exile became a slow vanishing. They wandered foreign lands, stripped of titles and wealth, carrying only memories. Letters and diaries from exiled monarchs show deep loneliness, confusion, and sometimes relief at escaping the suffocating rituals of court life. Their disappearance was both tragedy and release. The legends that follow these disappearances keep them alive. Stories of hidden heirs and secret survivors appear in every culture. From the lost dauphin of France to the rumored survival of Anastasia Romanov, people cling to the idea that royal blood cannot simply vanish. These tales are more than fantasies. They reflect a collective longing for continuity, a refusal to accept that something so grand could end in silence. Even today, novels, films, and documentaries revisit these mysteries, not just to entertain, but to explore why we care so much about the fate of vanished rulers. There is also a deeper lesson in the echoes of empire. Every throne, no matter how grand, is temporary. The symbols of power, the crown, the scepter, the palace, are fragile against time. What survives is not the rule itself, but the story. When we walk through ruins or read about vanished dynasties, we are reminded that human history is a cycle of rise and fall, creation and decay. Each empire believed it would last forever. None did. The silence in an empty throne room is not just the sound of loss, it is the sound of truth. By 2025, the fascination with monarchies has taken on new forms. Social media, documentaries, and renewed interest in ancestry have brought royal history back into public imagination. People trace family trees, hoping to find noble roots. Historians uncover old documents that challenge established narratives. But even in this age of information, mysteries remain. Some royal lines disappeared so completely that even their names are forgotten. They exist only in fragments, coins, inscriptions, ruins reclaimed by nature. The more we learn, the more we realize how much has been lost. It is not difficult to see why the image of a crumbling crown captures the imagination. It stands as a metaphor for all human achievement. Power fades, wealth disperses, memory erodes. Yet the trace of what once was continues to resonate. The echo of empire is the echo of humanity itself. Our desire to leave a mark, to be remembered, to matter. The vanished dynasties remind us that memory is both fragile and enduring. Though the crowns are gone, the stories endure, passed from generation to generation, reshaped by time. Every empire, whether ancient or modern, carries within it the seed of its own disappearance. Power creates resistance, wealth breeds envy, and time erases even the greatest monuments. Yet even in their fall, these empires leave gifts, architecture, art, laws, and ideas that shape the world long after the rulers are dust. The Roman Empire vanished, but its legacy still defines modern governance and language. The Byzantine emperors are gone, but their influence lives on in religion and art. The Mongol Khans vanished, but their conquests reshaped continents. The Ottoman sultans fell, but their cities still beat with the rhythm they built. Vanishing does not always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means transformation. When we imagine a dynasty disappearing, we are not only thinking about history, we are thinking about ourselves. Every generation faces the same question that haunted the emperors of old. What will remain when we are gone? The vanished thrones of history remind us that permanence is an illusion, yet meaning is not. A ruler's name may be forgotten, but their story, of ambition, love, cruelty, wisdom, and loss, continues to echo. It is those echoes that keep history alive. So picture once more the silent hall, the fallen crown, the empty throne. Dust settles where power once ruled. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world has moved on, but inside, time has stopped. The echoes of empire linger, faint but unbroken. They speak not of glory or conquest, but of the endless dance between power and oblivion. They remind us that everything built by human hands, no matter how mighty, will one day crumble. Yet even in ruin, there is memory, and in memory, there is life. The dynasties may have vanished, but their echoes remain, whispering through time, telling us that history never truly ends. It only fades, waits, and begins again in another form, in another place, with another crown waiting to fall. The echoes of empire carry us naturally into the stories of those dynasties whose ends came not through open rebellion or sudden catastrophe, but through quieter, more complex paths. Some were undone by their own bloodlines, some by the shifting weight of politics, and some by the slow tightening of external forces they could not control. These lost dynasties do not always vanish with the thunder of war. Sometimes they fade with the soft sound of doors closing in empty halls. Their stories reveal how fragile power can be, even for those who once believed themselves eternal. Among these are the House of Burgundy, the Merovingian kings, and the emperors of Trebizond, three very different dynasties bound by a shared destiny, disappearance. The House of Burgundy was one of the most influential families in medieval Europe, a dynasty whose lands stretched across what is now eastern France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of the Netherlands. At its height, Burgundy stood as a bridge between the French and Holy Roman Empires, powerful enough to rival both. The Dukes of Burgundy ruled with ambition, wealth, and remarkable political skill. Their court in Dijon became one of the most refined centers of art, music, and culture in Europe. They married into royal houses, negotiated alliances, and wove themselves into the fabric of continental politics. For a time, it seemed that Burgundy might even become a new empire, uniting lands from the Rhine to the Atlantic. But dynastic strength often carries within it the seeds of its undoing. The Burgundian dukes pursued power through strategic marriages, but in doing so, they tangled their lineage in webs of inheritance that blurred the borders between families and kingdoms. Their ambition to secure Burgundy's independence from both France and the Holy Roman Empire put them in constant conflict with larger powers. The turning point came with the rule of Charles the Bold in the 15th century. He inherited the vast Burgundian territories and sought to expand them even further, dreaming of transforming his duchy into a kingdom. His boldness, though admired, bordered on recklessness. Charles overreached. He waged wars against Swiss confederates and against France itself, exhausting his resources and alienating allies. In the Battle of Nancy in 1477, Charles fell in combat. His death left Burgundy without a male heir, and with it, the dynasty's future collapsed. The inheritance of Burgundy passed to Charles's daughter, Mary, who married Maximilian of Habsburg. That marriage changed European history. Through it, Burgundy's lands became part of the Habsburg Empire. What had once been an independent and glittering court was absorbed into a much larger, colder structure. The name of Burgundy faded from political maps, its identity swallowed by the ambitions of greater powers. The Duke's descendants would rule vast territories, but not under the banner of Burgundy. The dynasty did not end in violence or disgrace. It simply ceased to exist as a distinct line. Its power melted into the broader flow of European monarchy. The story of Burgundy is a lesson in how dynastic success, when too closely tied to marriage and alliance, can erase the very identity it seeks to preserve. Where the Burgundians were undone by absorption, the Merovingian kings of early medieval France disappeared through slow erosion. They began as conquerors. The founder of their line, traditionally known as Clovis, united the Frankish tribes in the 5th century and established a powerful Christian kingdom that laid the foundation for modern France. The Merovingians claimed descent from a semi-mythical figure, Merovech, whose name gave the dynasty its title. For a time, they ruled with strength and vision, expanding their territories and consolidating control over much of what had once been Roman Gaul. Their long hair became a symbol of royal authority, and their rule seemed ordained by divine favor. Yet power, once solid, began to slip through their fingers. By the 7th century, the Merovingians had become prisoners of their own system. The day-to-day running of the kingdom increasingly fell to officials known as mayors of the palace. Originally servants of the king, these mayors gained influence as the royal authority weakened. The Merovingian kings, often young, inexperienced, or uninterested in ruling, relied more heavily on these administrators. Gradually, the balance of power shifted. The kings remained figureheads, symbols of legitimacy, but the true control of the realm passed into other hands. This transformation was so gradual that contemporaries may not have realized it was happening. The mayors of the palace began to act as rulers in all but name. By the 8th century, the most powerful of them, Charles Martel, was commanding armies, making laws, and collecting taxes. The Merovingian kings, meanwhile, lived in comfort but without influence. Chroniclers began to call them do-nothing kings, not because they were lazy, but because their authority had become meaningless. They still wore crowns, but those crowns had lost their weight. The people still bowed to them, but their loyalty belonged to the men who actually governed. The final act came quietly. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, decided to formalize what everyone already knew, that the power of the realm no longer rested with the Merovingians. Pepin sought the approval of the Pope to legitimize his rule. The Church, eager for a strong protector, agreed. The last Merovingian king, Childeric III, was deposed and sent to a monastery. His long hair, the ancient symbol of royal power, was cut off, marking the end of his line's sacred authority. Thus the Merovingian dynasty, which had once united and defined a nation, slipped out of history almost unnoticed. The Carolingians, beginning with Pepin and later his son Charlemagne, rose in their place. The Merovingians became ghosts, names preserved in chronicles, their bloodline dissolved into the mist of legend. Their fall was not marked by conquest or betrayal, but by quiet irrelevance. It shows how power can be lost not through defeat, but through neglect. When authority becomes ceremonial and decision-making is surrendered to others, a dynasty can fade without anyone realizing it has already died. The Merovingians remind us that disappearance can come not with a scream, but with a sigh. The story of the emperors of Trebizond carries a different kind of silence, one born of isolation. When the Byzantine Empire was shattered by the Fourth Crusade in the early 13th century, its vast territories splintered into smaller successor states. Among them was the Empire of Trebizond, founded on the southern coast of the Black Sea. Established by the Komnenos family, who traced their descent from Byzantine emperors, Trebizond became a refuge for Greek culture and authority after the fall of Constantinople to Latin crusaders. Its capital, perched between mountains and sea, thrived as a center of trade and art. For more than 200 years, it stood as a small but enduring outpost of Byzantine tradition. The emperors of Trebizond ruled with elegance and diplomacy, maintaining their independence through a delicate balance of alliances and tribute. They traded with Genoese and Venetian merchants, corresponded with rulers across Asia, and even engaged diplomatically with Mongol and Persian powers. Their court was famous for its beauty, its religious devotion, and its learning. Yet, for all its refinement, Trebizond was vulnerable. Cut off from the main centers of Greek power and surrounded by larger, more aggressive states, it depended on the goodwill of others to survive. Its geography offered both protection and confinement. The mountains shielded it, but also isolated it. The sea connected it to the wider world, but also exposed it to attack. Over time, the pressures surrounding Trebizond grew heavier. The Mongol Empire's rise in the 13th century reshaped the political landscape, forcing the emperors to pay tribute to avoid destruction. Later, as the Ottoman Turks expanded across Anatolia, Trebizond found itself increasingly cornered. The once mighty Byzantine Empire had by then been reduced to a shadow of its former self, and Constantinople itself would fall to the Ottomans in 1453. Trebizond remained the last bastion of Byzantine royalty, a flickering light in a darkening. The final emperor, David Komnenos, faced the impossible task of defending a small, isolated state against a rising empire. In 1461, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror turned his attention toward Trebizond. The siege that followed was brief but decisive. The walls of the city, though strong, could not withstand the might of the Ottoman forces. Trebizond surrendered. The emperor was captured and later executed, along with members of his family. The Komnenos dynasty, which had traced its lineage back to emperors of the Old Byzantium, was extinguished. The empire of Trebizond ceased to exist, absorbed into the Ottoman realm. Its fall was not only the end of a dynasty, but also the final closing of a chapter that had begun with the Roman Empire itself. Yet even in its destruction, Trebizond left echoes. Its art, especially its churches and manuscripts, carried the last flame of Byzantine style. Its stories survived in Greek memory and folklore, blending history with legend. The city itself remained, transformed under Ottoman rule, but still holding traces of its imperial past. Like the Burgundians and the Merovingians, the emperors of Trebizond vanished not only from politics but from identity. Their names lived on only in whispers and chronicles. The dynasty that had once claimed descent from the ancient Romans ended in silence by the sea. These three stories, though different in their causes and settings, share a common thread. They reveal that dynasties do not simply end. They dissolve through the choices, circumstances, and forces that define their time. The Burgundians lost themselves in the embrace of stronger powers. The Merovingians surrendered authority to those who once served them. The Komnenos of Trebizond were consumed by the advance of empires too large to resist. In each case, what disappears is not only a family line but an entire vision of the world. The fall of these dynasties also reflects the larger rhythm of history. Power is never static. It flows like water, finding new channels when old ones close. Each dynasty believes itself to be eternal, yet every reign carries the seeds of its own decline. The Burgundians, with their ambition and alliances, could not foresee that their very success would make them targets of greater powers. The Merovingians, lulled by ceremony, could not see how easily their servants would become their masters. The emperors of Trebizond, clinging to survival in a changing world, could not halt the tide of empires. In their different ways, each mirrors the same truth, that time erodes even the strongest foundations. The legacy of these vanished houses still shapes the world we know. The Burgundian lands became the heart of the Habsburg Netherlands, influencing European politics for centuries. The Merovingians laid the groundwork for the French state and for the Carolingian Empire that would later define medieval Europe. Trebizond, though small, preserved the flame of Byzantine culture at a time when much of it was threatened by conquest and change. Even in vanishing, they contributed to the continuity of history. Their disappearance did not erase them, it transformed them. In studying these dynasties, we see how disappearance is rarely final. The echoes remain, in art, in law, in legend. The Burgundian tapestries that still hang in European museums, the Merovingian names preserved in chronicles, the Byzantine mosaics of Trebizond's churches, all speak to a past that refuses to die completely. Power fades, but culture endures. Authority crumbles, but memory rebuilds. A dynasty may vanish, but the mark it leaves on history cannot be erased. When we look back on these stories, the image of the empty throne returns once more. The crumbling crown of Burgundy, the faded symbol of Merovingian hair, the fallen scepter of Trebizond, all are reminders that no throne is unshakable. Yet they are also reminders of resilience. What is lost is not truly gone. It becomes part of the world's shared memory. The whispers of the vanished still move through time, shaping how we understand power, fragility, and the passage of generations. Each echo reminds us that history is not a straight line but a circle, that the end of one empire is often the beginning of another, and that the stories of the lost dynasties still live wherever their shadows fall. In the quiet between what was and what will be, their echoes endure, proof that even when power fades, history never forgets those who once wore the crown. The echoes that linger from vanished empires lead us to a quieter and more complex truth. No dynasty disappears by accident. Behind every fallen throne and every empty crown lies a chain of causes, a slow unraveling of stability, or a single event that tears centuries of power apart. When we look closer at these vanishings, we see not random acts of fate, but clear mechanisms of oblivion. War and conquest, internal decay and abdication, assimilation and intermarriage. These are the paths through which royal lines are erased from history. Each one acts in its own rhythm. Some strike suddenly, like fire consuming a city. Others creep softly through generations until the line simply dissolves. Together they reveal how fragile the illusion of permanence truly is. War and conquest are perhaps the most visible destroyers of dynasties. History is filled with rulers who stood firm behind walls, confident in their strength, only to see everything swept away in a single campaign. The sword has no respect for bloodlines. The fall of Troy, remembered more as myth than fact, stands as one of the earliest tales of such obliteration. A royal house, proud and ancient, is reduced to ash. Its king is slain, its princes scattered, its women taken captive. Though poets later immortalized their names, the dynasty itself was gone. The pattern repeats throughout history, each time reshaped by new weapons, new empires, and new ambitions. When the Mongol armies swept across Asia in the 13th century, entire dynasties vanished under their advance. Cities that had ruled for generations were burned to the ground, their rulers executed or enslaved. The Khwarezmian Shahs, who once controlled a vast empire stretching from Persia to Central Asia, were wiped out almost entirely after offending the Mongol leader Genghis Khan. Their royal line was extinguished in a storm of vengeance, so complete that even their capital cities were reduced to dust. In one generation, a dynasty that had seemed unshakable ceased to exist. Conquest has a way of reducing centuries of rule to a footnote. Later centuries witnessed similar annihilations. The Aztec and Inca empires both fell to European invaders whose weapons and diseases destroyed their political and social structures. Moctezuma of the Aztecs died during the chaos of conquest, and his successors were never recognized as legitimate rulers. The Inca emperor Atahualpa was executed after a mock trial, his body buried hastily by those who feared his people's wrath. In both cases, the ruling families tried to preserve their lines through hidden heirs, but colonial power crushed every attempt at revival. The dynasties were not merely defeated, they were erased. Their temples were torn down, their palaces burned, and their bloodlines scattered. In their place rose foreign rulers who reshaped the land and its memory. What remains of them today are fragments, ruins, legends, and names half remembered in song. Even in Europe, where monarchy often claimed divine protection, war proved merciless. The fall of Constantinople in the 15th century ended the Byzantine line that had stretched back to Rome itself. Emperor Constantine XI died defending his city against the Ottomans. His body was never found. His dynasty perished with him, and the empire that had stood for more than 1,000 years was absorbed into another. The Ottomans, in their turn, would centuries later meet a similar fate. When their empire collapsed after the Great War in the 20th century, the last sultan fled into exile. The Turkish Republic abolished the monarchy altogether, and the royal family was expelled. What had once been a line of rulers stretching back to the Middle Ages was reduced to a handful of exiles living in foreign lands. War does not always end with death. Sometimes it leaves its victims alive, but stripped of everything that defined them. Conquest, however, is not the only path to oblivion. Sometimes the destruction comes from within. Internal decay, mismanagement, and abdication can dissolve dynasties more effectively than any enemy army. The decline often begins quietly, with poor leadership, divided councils, or a loss of faith among the people. A ruler may still wear the crown, but its meaning fades as power slips through unseen cracks. The Roman Empire, though it endured for centuries, provides a perfect example. Its emperors became more concerned with luxury and intrigue than with governance. Civil wars broke out as generals and politicians fought for control. The title of emperor, once sacred, became a prize passed between ambitious men. By the time the Western Empire fell, it had already hollowed itself out. The dynasty of Augustus had long vanished, replaced by transient rulers whose names blurred into one another. The empire collapsed not because it was conquered, but because it decayed from within. In other cases, abdication, voluntary or forced, serves as the final act of decline. It is perhaps the most human form of disappearance, a ruler choosing, or being compelled, to step down. When King Edward VIII of Britain abdicated in the 20th century, he did so for personal reasons rather than political failure, but his decision marked a break in the royal continuity that shocked the world. The throne passed to his brother, and Edward lived the rest of his life in quiet exile. Though the British monarchy survived, his own line ended there. The act of abdication symbolizes the loss of will to continue a legacy, a surrender to forces, whether personal, political, or moral, that outweigh the desire for power. History records many such abdications that led not just to a loss of authority, but to obscurity. The last emperor of China, Puyi, was forced to abdicate in the early 20th century as revolution transformed his empire into a republic. Though he briefly returned as a puppet under Japanese occupation, his dynasty's authority was gone. He spent his later years as a private citizen, working as a gardener and librarian, a living reminder of how far a ruler could fall. His story captures the full arc of decay, from divine emperor to forgotten man. Power fades quietly when a ruler surrenders it willingly or under pressure. No armies are needed. The walls collapse from within. Internal decay often stems from the same sources: greed, complacency, division, or an inability to adapt. In the late stages of many dynasties, rulers become disconnected from the world beyond their palaces. They lose the trust of their subjects, who no longer see the monarchy as sacred or necessary. Bureaucracy becomes corrupt, armies weaken, and the court falls into luxury and intrigue. The Bourbon monarchy in France met this fate before the Revolution. While their court dazzled with elegance and art, their detachment from the struggles of ordinary people bred resentment. When the storm of revolution came, the dynasty had already lost its moral authority. The guillotine only completed what had already begun in spirit. The decay had turned to collapse, and the once powerful royal line ended beneath the blade. But not all vanishings are violent or tragic. Some are gentle, so quiet that history almost misses them. Assimilation and intermarriage can erase a dynasty not through destruction, but through blending. When royal families intermarry, their distinct identities dissolve into new lines. The House of Burgundy, as seen before, was absorbed into the Habsburgs through marriage. Their lands continued to flourish, but their name faded. What had been one family's legacy became part of another's story. The crown passes on, but the line that once bore it becomes invisible. This process was common in medieval and early modern Europe, where marriages served as tools of diplomacy. A princess from one house would marry a prince from another, joining two dynasties into one. If her husband's line proved stronger or more politically advantageous, her family's name might vanish from succession records within a generation. The result was a slow merging of power, a quiet loss of individuality. In some cases, such unions brought peace and stability. In others, they erased centuries of heritage. The Capetians of France, one of Europe's longest ruling families, survived through branches and offshoots that often merged with other noble lines. The main house eventually faded, its descendants living under different names and titles. Their blood continued, but their identity was gone. Assimilation also occurred when conquered rulers married into the families of their conquerors. This was both a political and symbolic act, a way to prevent rebellion and ensure loyalty. The defeated royal line would become part of the new regime, their heirs raised under a different flag. Over time, their distinct heritage disappeared. In some cases, this was intentional. By marrying the daughters or sisters of defeated kings, conquerors absorbed legitimacy along with territory. The old dynasty lived on only in memory, its symbols replaced, its name rewritten in new histories. Outside Europe, similar patterns played out. In Japan, during the long centuries of shogunate rule, imperial authority remained technically intact, but real power rested with military families. Through alliances and marriages, the line between ruler and servant blurred. The emperor's divine status preserved the institution, but the political role was largely ceremonial. The imperial house survived not because it resisted assimilation, but because it allowed itself to be absorbed within a larger structure of governance. Its endurance, paradoxically, came from surrendering to invisibility. The mechanism of assimilation is perhaps the most subtle form of oblivion because it preserves life while erasing distinction. The people of a realm might still bow to a crown, but the blood behind that crown no longer carries a single identity. Over centuries, even the most proud dynasties blend into the general fabric of nobility. A descendant of kings becomes just another aristocrat, then perhaps an ordinary citizen. The titles may remain, but their meaning evaporates. The lineage that once defined nations becomes a trace in genealogical charts. In each of these paths, war, decay, and assimilation, the result is the same: disappearance. Yet each teaches a different lesson about the fragility of power. War reminds us that no fortress is unbreachable. Internal decay shows that the greatest danger often comes from within. Assimilation reveals that even survival can be a form of extinction. Together they create the mechanisms of oblivion, the quiet machinery by which time dismantles what pride and ambition build. The human stories behind these mechanisms make them more than abstract patterns. When a city falls to conquest, it is not only walls that crumble but lives that are erased. When a ruler abdicates, it is not only a crown that is lost but a sense of identity. When a dynasty is absorbed, generations of tradition fade into anonymity. The grand scale of history hides the small griefs that accompany these ends. The servant who no longer knows whose banner to serve, the child raised never knowing the meaning of their family name, the last heir who dies in exile with no one left to remember. The machinery of oblivion moves quietly, but it leaves deep scars. If we listen closely, we can still hear the echoes of these vanishings. They are in the ruins of castles that once held proud courts, in the faded crests carved into stone, in the old records that bear the names of forgotten rulers. The world carries their traces even when their stories are no longer told. Every city built on the remains of another, every nation that emerged from an older kingdom, is part of this long cycle of memory and forgetting. The mechanisms that erase dynasties also shape the civilizations that follow them. Out of destruction comes renewal, out of decay, transformation. To understand these mechanisms is to understand how history moves. War clears the stage for new powers. Internal weakness opens the door to reform or revolution. Assimilation blends cultures and ideas, creating something entirely new. The loss of a dynasty is not always the end of a culture. It can be the beginning of a new one. When the Byzantine line fell, its scholars carried knowledge westward, helping to ignite the Renaissance. When the Inca and Aztec dynasties were destroyed, their traditions survived in art, language, and religion, woven into the culture of the lands that replaced them. Even in loss, there is persistence. The disappearance of royal lines is not simply a story of endings. It is also a story of transformation. The same forces that bring down dynasties shape the future in their wake. Conquest spreads ideas as well as bloodshed. Decay teaches new forms of governance. Assimilation creates new identities from old. The ghosts of vanished monarchies continue to walk beside us, not as reminders of failure, but as proof that nothing in history truly vanishes. Every lost dynasty leaves behind something, an idea, a tradition, a memory, that becomes part of the world that follows. As the echoes of these mechanisms fade, we return to that silent throne room, the symbol of all that has been lost and all that remains. The crown on the floor no longer belongs to anyone, yet it still glimmers faintly in the dust. It carries within it the weight of conquest, the sadness of abdication, and the quiet surrender of assimilation. Around it lies the debris of centuries, fragments of empires that once believed themselves eternal. The air is still, but if we listen carefully, we can almost hear the whispers of those who once ruled. Their voices are faint but persistent, carried forward by the same wind that sweeps away their names. These are the mechanisms of oblivion, the unseen forces that draw curtains over entire worlds. They do not destroy everything, they change it. Power fades, names disappear, but history continues, reshaped by the silence that follows. The vanished dynasties remind us that even when the last heir is gone, the story is not over. It lives on in memory, in ruins, in the quiet lessons that time teaches over and over. That nothing built by human hands lasts forever, yet nothing truly disappears. The echoes endure, long after the last crown has fallen. The ways in which royal families fade away are many, and often they work together. Sometimes a single blow, sometimes a long erosion. War and conquest, internal decay and abdication, assimilation and intermarriage. Each is its own force, and sometimes all three combine. To understand vanished dynasties, we must see how these mechanisms operate, often unseen, sometimes sudden, often gradual. Conflict can destroy more than armies. It can erase entire lineages. One successful invasion or siege, one betrayal, one victory by an outside power can wipe out a family's claims, power, even existence. When a conquered dynasty's rulers are killed, or their heirs hunted down, there may be none left to carry the name. Even if some survive, exile and loss of territory can weaken a dynasty to the point where its identity becomes hollow. Castles fall, archives burn, dynastic records are lost, and with them the memory of who these people really were. Through conquest, a dynasty not only loses land and subjects, it may lose its ability to be remembered except in myths or in the histories written by its conquerors. At times, wars are not needed. Internal collapse, weak rulers, factional fighting, corruption, loss of confidence by nobles or subjects, can degrade authority until the dynasty is little more than ornament. When rulers become figureheads, when decisions are made by ministers, eunuchs, regents, or other power holders while the royal family merely watches, the crown becomes a burden without its rights. Power gathered by others leaves the royal house with the symbol, but not the substance of authority. Meanwhile, abdication, voluntary or forced, can be the turning point. A ruler might give up power to avoid civil war, or as a result of political pressure. A dynasty that once claimed universal loyalty may in time find itself bypassed. What is left is a name without influence, a throne without respect. In many cases, ruling houses are not destroyed by violence but absorbed. Intermarriage between royal families is a common tool of alliance and diplomacy. A princess marrying a foreign prince, a royal child sent to be raised in another court. These are ways dynasts extend influence, but they also blur lines. Distinct dynastic identity can fade when the children of such unions claim succession under a different name or under political pressure adopt the dominant culture. As they merge, one line may survive in records while the other becomes less distinct, eventually lost. The older house's symbols, languages, rituals may be replaced. Its laws may be absorbed by the new ruling family systems. Over generations, the memory of the older line becomes part of folklore or genealogy, rather than active power. Looking at how these work together helps to explain the disappearing dynasties already discussed. The House of Burgundy fell in part due to intermarriage and alliances that led to absorption. It also suffered war, loss of male heirs, and strategic miscalculations. The Merovingian kings lost power, not by being defeated on the battlefield, but by internal decay, letting authority slip away to mayors who did the real ruling. The emperors of Trebizond were under constant external threat. War and conquest took the final blow, but before that isolation weakened their resources and alliances. None of these mechanisms works in isolation in most cases. A dynasty may begin decaying internally, making it vulnerable to conquest. Or it may intermarry heavily, weakening internal cohesion and identity, which invites outside powers to interfere. Or abdication may follow war. Often there is no single moment of disappearance. Instead, there is a long goodbye. When we piece together the tales of silent erasure, what becomes clear is that power, though it seems permanent, depends on many fragile supports: loyal subjects, heirs, alliances, records, ceremonies, symbols. Lose enough of those supports, and dissolution follows. A royal line might live on in name but not in power, or in power but not in identity. And yet, despite all these forces pushing dynasties toward oblivion, human memory persists. Art, literature, architecture survive. Names are preserved in genealogies, legends, and sometimes in deliberate efforts to reclaim or remember. Even when the crown lies in ruin, even when the throne room is empty, the story remains. The vanishing of a dynasty is more than the end of a family. It is a transformation of memory, of meaning. The mechanisms of oblivion erase authority, but not entirely the presence. The echoes of power continue in what has been left. In ruins, in traditions, in the stories that refuse to let the vanished be truly forgotten. Even when a dynasty fades and its symbols crumble, the silence it leaves behind is not empty. It carries echoes that shape memory, identity, and the way we understand power itself. The disappearance of royal families across history is never only a political event, it is a human story. These vanished houses continue to cast shadows, their legacies scattered in culture, language, tradition, and myth. Their absence raises questions that refuse to rest, questions that keep historians, storytellers, and dreamers searching for traces of what once was. The end of a dynasty often leaves a void, and in that void, legends grow. There are always unanswered questions. Did every member of a fallen royal family truly perish? Did some escape, change their names, and blend into the common life of their people? Could a farmer's descendant, a merchant's child, carry royal blood without knowing it? These mysteries haunt history because power once so visible cannot easily vanish without leaving behind speculation. When a crown falls and a lineage is said to have ended, records are often incomplete or destroyed. Wars burn archives, conquests distort truths, and victors rewrite genealogies. The truth of who survived or how often lies buried under centuries of confusion and retelling. The House of Burgundy, whose power once stretched across parts of modern France, the Low Countries, and beyond, did not vanish overnight. Documents show marriages that tied them to other European powers, and some of those bloodlines persisted in later noble families. Yet their political identity as Burgundy disappeared. The question remains whether their descendants continued under other names, their royal blood diluted across generations of intermarriage until it became untraceable. The same curiosity arises with the Merovingian line. When the do-nothing kings lost authority to their mayors, the records became unclear about the last true heirs. Rumors persisted for centuries that the bloodline survived quietly, woven into the population or hidden among the nobility. In later centuries, these rumors inspired countless legends, secret genealogies, and even conspiracy theories linking forgotten monarchs to myths of divine right and ancient bloodlines. The emperors of Trebizond, though seemingly extinguished by conquest, may have left descendants who assimilated into new empires. Some were taken into Ottoman service. Others may have settled in regions where their lineage faded into local aristocracy. Even after their empire was absorbed, stories about their wealth, piety, and final days persisted in regional songs and folktales. The same pattern appears across many vanished dynasties. Total extinction is rare. What vanishes is often recognition, not blood. Royal identity depends on acknowledgement, and once that is gone, descendants become ordinary, even if their ancestors once ruled. This blurring between the remembered and the forgotten keeps history alive with unanswered questions. Each disappearance also leaves behind cultural traces. These are not always obvious, but they linger in laws, architecture, art, and even language. When the Burgundian line ended, their courtly culture had already influenced European diplomacy, music, and chivalric ideals. The Burgundian school of music shaped the development of early polyphony, leaving an imprint on the art of sound long after their duchy was gone. Their sense of order and ceremony influenced court life in France and Spain. Though their dynasty perished, their style survived in the way Europe imagined nobility itself. The Merovingians, too, left more than broken crowns. They helped shape the early political landscape of what would become France and Germany. Their legal traditions, once grounded in tribal custom, began to merge with Roman law during their rule. The remnants of this fusion continued to influence medieval governance for centuries. Even the idea of sacred kingship, of a monarch chosen by divine will, found roots in Merovingian belief. Their memory influenced how later rulers justified authority, even when the Merovingians themselves had been dismissed as idle. Their absence made room for the Carolingians, yet their shadow lingered behind the new order. The emperors of Trebizond carried the final fragment of Byzantine splendor. Their small court preserved art, iconography, and orthodox rituals that might have otherwise vanished after the fall of Constantinople. Even after their empire was absorbed, Those cultural threads continued in the monasteries and churches of the Black Sea region. The architecture of their capital influenced later Ottoman designs. Their trade routes helped shape regional economies. Though their name faded, their cultural imprint became part of the foundation on which later powers built. Such echoes remind us that even in disappearance there is endurance. Power leaves traces not only in monuments but in habits of thought, in artistic taste, in local traditions, and in the language of governance. When a dynasty vanishes, it is absorbed into the living culture of its people, shaping how they remember their own past. A vanished monarchy might still be felt in national identity centuries later, in the pride of a city, the layout of a palace, or the cadence of an anthem. History's ghosts live quietly among us. Yet the greatest legacy of these vanished houses lies not in what they left behind materially, but in the questions they force us to ask about the nature of power itself. Their fragility reveals that authority, no matter how divine it may claim to be, is bound to time, circumstance, and human weakness. Dynasties rise believing their rule will last forever, built on the faith that blood, ritual, and order ensure permanence. But history proves otherwise. Power is sustained by perception. When people cease to believe, when loyalty shifts, or when new realities emerge, even the mightiest thrones can crumble. Looking at these disappearances from the perspective of today, in a world still filled with monarchies, constitutional or symbolic, one sees a subtle reflection. In 2025, many nations retain royal families, though their power is mostly ceremonial. They are remnants of a world where lineage meant law. Yet even now, the question of legitimacy and survival remains. The lessons of the lost dynasties whisper that reverence can become routine, and routine can become irrelevance. The forms of monarchy endure, but their meaning changes with time. The fragility of power, whether held by kings or governments, is a constant theme of human history. Technology, globalization, and shifting social forces now replace the old weapons of conquest. A ruler's fall today may not come from invasion, but from loss of trust, from exposure, from the erosion of authority in a world that moves faster than any court could once imagine. The ancient pattern continues: decay, absorption, transformation, though the forms have changed. The past reminds us that even the strongest institutions depend on human faith. When that faith wanes, no title or bloodline can save them. There is also a deeper, almost moral echo in these disappearances. The fall of dynasties shows the impermanence of glory, the inevitable passing of every order that once seemed eternal. Yet within that truth lies renewal. Each vanished dynasty clears space for something new, forcing societies to adapt, rebuild, redefine themselves. The world moves forward not only by innovation but by forgetting, by letting go of what no longer fits. The echoes of empire are both warning and inheritance. They remind us that memory is selective, and that survival often means transformation rather than resistance. These stories endure because they speak to universal human fears and hopes. The thought of complete erasure, of a name, a line, a heritage, touches the same anxiety that drives us to preserve our own stories. When we read of the last emperor of Trebizond or the final Merovingian king, we are not only witnessing political change, but confronting the fragile nature of identity itself. How much of who we are depends on recognition by others? How long can legacy survive without power to sustain it? These questions give history its pulse. In the modern age, where records are stored in vast digital archives and every event seems preserved, it is easy to believe that such disappearance could never happen again. Yet history suggests otherwise. The mechanisms of oblivion have only changed form. Instead of lost manuscripts and burned palaces, there are now shifting algorithms, forgotten data, and the constant noise of new information burying the old. The past teaches that obscurity is not always caused by destruction, but by neglect. Even royal legacies can fade when no one looks for them. That is why the echoes of vanished dynasties continue to fascinate. They remind us of the balance between power and memory, between visibility and silence. Every time we study their stories, we revive them in small ways, giving voice to those who would otherwise remain names in a list. In doing so, we honor the strange persistence of history, the way it refuses to vanish entirely, even when its monuments crumble. Perhaps somewhere, the bloodlines of these lost houses still flow, unnoticed, in ordinary lives. Perhaps the descendant of a Burgundian duke works quietly in a field or a city office, unaware of their connection to forgotten power. Perhaps a family name in a small village near the Black Sea carries the last whisper of Trebizond's emperors. If so, history continues, not as grandeur but as ordinary existence. The difference between ruler and subject dissolves with time, leaving only shared humanity. That is the final legacy of vanished dynasties. Their disappearance teaches humility. It shows that the symbols of greatness, crowns, thrones, palaces, are temporary. What endures is not the family name, but the cultural and moral influence that survives in people's lives. Each fallen empire becomes part of the world's collective story, reminding future generations that permanence is an illusion. The mightiest empires thought themselves eternal. All were mistaken. Yet through their fall, they gave us understanding. They showed that power is a mirror held up to time. Clear one moment, clouded the next, and finally reflective only of what others remember. So when we stand before a ruined fortress or read the last entries in an ancient chronicle, we are not only mourning what was lost. We are listening. The echoes that reach us speak of ambition, beauty, failure, and endurance. They ask us to consider what it means to leave a trace, what it means to matter beyond the span of our own lives. In that sense, the vanished dynasties are not gone. They live wherever memory persists, wherever curiosity stirs, wherever someone asks, what happened to them? The unanswered questions keep the past alive. The cultural echoes remind us of what remains. And the lessons for today caution that power, however brilliant, stands always on shifting ground. In every age, the story repeats. Empires rise, flourish, and fade. Yet their echoes continue to shape the living world, murmuring through time that nothing lasts forever, and that even in disappearance, meaning endures. History often records the fall of empires as a matter of politics and power, of treaties signed and wars lost, but behind every vanished dynasty lies something more intimate and human. It is not only the fading of a symbol or the loss of a throne. It is the end of entire families, the silencing of lineages that once believed themselves eternal. When we look closer, the collapse of royal houses reveals itself as a story of grief and transformation. Beneath the grandeur of banners and emblems are people, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, facing the same fear of being forgotten that touches everyone. The human element turns these tales from mere historical curiosities into living reminders of fragility, hope, and the impermanence of all things built by human hands. Imagine what it must have been like to stand in a deserted throne room, where the air still carries the echo of ceremony and power, yet the crown that once ruled lies untouched, collecting dust. For every dynasty that vanished, there were individuals who lived the loss firsthand. The last members of those royal lines were often not defiant conquerors or tragic heroes, but human beings caught in a moment too vast for them to control. They experienced the slow realization that their name, once feared or revered, would no longer open doors or inspire loyalty. Their children might grow up under new regimes, their language might change, their ancestral lands might belong to others. The end of a dynasty is not only the end of governance, it is the fading of memory within the very people who carried it. When the House of Burgundy dissolved into larger powers, its surviving descendants faced this shift. Their grand halls, once centers of diplomacy, became regional estates under foreign rule. A duchess who had once held influence at court found herself reduced to a ceremonial figure, remembered for her beauty or her piety rather than her leadership. To those who once served them, their downfall was more than political, it was emotional, even spiritual. The same was true for the Merovingians, whose gradual decline meant watching power slip away generation after generation. The early kings may have believed in divine right, but by the end, their successors were seen as little more than shadows, figureheads while others ruled in their name. Imagine the despair of knowing you were born to a crown yet held no authority, that your own ministers laughed quietly at your weakness while still bowing in your presence. The tragedy of the Merovingian end lies in this slow humiliation, a death not by sword but by irrelevance. For the emperors of Trebizond, the end came in a storm of conquest. They faced an empire closing in from all sides, knowing each lost battle meant more than territory, it meant extinction. Their royal court, once a jewel of Byzantine survival, became a memory as the Ottomans advanced. When their capital fell, the emperor and his family were captured, their future uncertain. There are records that some members of the family were spared, even granted places in the new order, but that survival came at the cost of their identity. To live meant to let go of who they had been. Such compromises mark the human cost of every empire's fall. It is in this intersection between history and humanity that the enduring mystery lies. These vanished dynasties draw us not only because of their grandeur, but because their endings mirror our own fears of disappearance. Power and status are magnified reflections of what everyone faces on a smaller scale. The desire to be remembered, to leave something behind that will outlast us. When a royal house vanishes, it symbolizes that even those who seem untouchable cannot escape time. Their monuments crumble, their names fade, and what remains is the same question that lingers over every person. What, if anything, endures? The unanswered questions that surround these disappearances deepen that fascination. We know some facts, but rarely the full story. Did every heir truly perish? Were there survivors who changed names, crossed borders, and lived quietly under new identities? Did secret bloodlines continue in hidden corners of the world? Many dynasties have legends of such survivors, and the absence of proof only strengthens belief. History often leaves gaps wide enough for imagination to fill. Stories of royal heirs disguised as commoners or secret societies guarding ancient claims are not only romantic inventions, but expressions of a deep human need to believe that something once great does not simply vanish. We invent myths to resist finality. Even scholars cannot fully close these mysteries. Archaeological finds, genetic research, and rediscovered manuscripts occasionally reveal clues, but they rarely solve everything. Instead, they open new questions. A burial site identified centuries later might reignite debates about lineage. A signature in a forgotten archive might suggest survival where extinction was assumed. History resists completion. Every vanished dynasty remains a riddle, part truth, part imagination, each retelling reshaping its meaning. And perhaps that is why they continue to captivate us. Behind the chronicles and ruins, there are faces we cannot see but feel drawn to. We imagine the last heir of a great house walking alone through the halls of a conquered palace, or the child of a dethroned monarch growing up unaware of the heritage they carry. Such images blur the line between history and myth, between the known and the possible. The loss of a dynasty is not only a matter for scholars. It is a story that belongs to everyone who wonders about fate, legacy, and the silent passage of time. These stories endure because they touch on something universal. The fall of empires, the erasure of names, the struggle to preserve memory, all speak to the same truth that no human creation lasts forever. Yet paradoxically, it is this impermanence that gives history its beauty. Every vanished dynasty adds another layer to our shared understanding of endurance. Their disappearance becomes a kind of gift, a reminder that what defines greatness is not its duration, but its impact. Their laws shaped nations, their art inspired generations, their stories still stir curiosity. Even when their crowns turned to dust, their influence lingered in language, architecture, and custom. The human tragedy of their fall also carries lessons for our time. In 2025, the world still witnesses the rise and fall of powers. Not monarchies as before, but institutions, corporations, movements, and governments. The patterns remain the same. Authority thrives when it adapts and falters when it forgets its roots. Like the dynasties of the past, today's leaders often mistake stability for permanence. The stories of lost empires remind us that power built on pride or isolation is fragile. The smallest shifts, a loss of trust, a changing world, can undo centuries of dominance. In that sense, the vanished dynasties are not relics of a distant past, but mirrors held up to the present. They warn that no empire, however vast, no institution, however confident, can escape time's erosion. Yet they also show that influence does not depend solely on survival. Even in their absence, they shaped the future. Their fall made way for new forms of order, new ideas of legitimacy, new visions of what power could mean. They remind us that every ending is also a beginning, that renewal often requires letting go of what once seemed unchangeable. What makes their memory endure is our continued fascination. We return to them not because of their palaces or battles, but because we sense in their stories something of ourselves. Each of us, in our own way, faces the passage of time, the loss of what once defined us, and the hope that something of us will remain. These vanished dynasties turn that personal truth into a grand, visible form. Their disappearance becomes a metaphor for human existence itself. Brilliant for a moment, then gone, yet somehow echoing still. So, as we reach the end of this journey through the echoes of empire, the question lingers. Which vanished dynasty draws you most? Is it the Burgundians, a absorbed into larger powers until their name dissolved? Is it the Merovingians, whose slow decay turned divine kingship into emptiness? Or the emperors of Trebizond, whose courage could not withstand conquest, but whose spirit lived on in art and legend? Each story offers a different glimpse into the nature of impermanence. Perhaps your fascination lies with another, one of the countless forgotten houses whose names barely survive in the margins of history. What do you think happened to them? Do you believe every line truly ended, or do you imagine hidden heirs living quietly among us, unaware of the legacy in their blood? Were these vanishings acts of fate, or were they the result of choices, mistakes, pride, betrayal, or the inevitable turning of history's wheel? These are questions that have no single answer, and that is why they endure. The mystery itself keeps the past alive. Every theory, every story shared, becomes part of the living memory of what was lost. If this exploration has stirred your curiosity, if the idea of vanished power and forgotten names resonates with you, then the story is not over. History is a conversation, not a closed book. Each discovery, each question, each discussion adds another voice to the chorus of memory. The echoes of these empires continue as long as someone listens, asks, and imagines. The fall of a dynasty might mark the end of an age, but its story belongs to everyone who seeks to understand how greatness fades and what remains after it does. The call then is simple: engage with these mysteries. Explore them. Ask what they reveal not only about kings and queens, but about human nature itself. Think about the connections between the world they knew and the one we inhabit today. Power still shifts. Memory still falters. And yet the desire to understand remains as strong as ever. History invites participation. It needs witnesses willing to look beyond the surface of facts and see the people behind them. So take a moment to reflect. Which story stayed with you? Was it the slow unraveling of the Merovingians, the quiet absorption of the Burgundians, or the dramatic fall of Trebizond? Or was it something deeper, the realization that all of them, for all their difference in time and place, shared the same fate? Whatever draws you, let it lead you to ask more, to read more, to question more. These vanished dynasties are not finished. Their silence still speaks. And as this chapter of exploration closes, remember that history is never static. It is a living conversation carried forward by those who care enough to listen. The next time you walk through a ruined fortress, see a faded coat of arms, or hear a story of lost royalty, consider that you are part of the same continuum of curiosity. Every act of remembering, every question asked, defies oblivion. If these echoes have moved you, if the mystery of forgotten empires has sparked your imagination, share your thoughts. Which dynasty fascinates you most? What theories do you hold about their disappearance? Could their bloodlines still flow among us? Could we, unknowingly, be the living descendants of those once thought erased? These questions may never be answered fully, and that is what makes them powerful. They keep the dialogue between past and present alive. Join this journey into the hidden corners of history. Add your voice to the search for meaning among ruins and silence. There are countless untold stories waiting beyond the familiar pages of textbooks, tales of courage, loss, rebirth, and mystery that reveal how much of humanity lies within its forgotten chapters. The echoes of empire are not only about kings and empires long gone, they are about endurance, memory, and the eternal human longing to understand what came before us. So, as we part here, let curiosity be your guide. Continue seeking, questioning, imagining. The past is not distant. It breathes in every story we tell, in every mystery that still calls out from the shadows. And perhaps by listening to those echoes, we not only honor what has vanished, but also discover something lasting within ourselves. Stay curious, share your thoughts below, and join us next time as we uncover more untold stories from history's hidden corners.